There was a major development in the Gulf War yesterday. The first American F-15E Eagle fighter jet was shot down. The search and rescue operation is still ongoing. There were two pilots. One has already been found by the US military, while the second one has not yet been located. So, what exactly happened before and after this incident? Today, I, Fang Wei, am bringing you the latest and most complete update on this news. Secondly, there's a question. The United States has already reduced Iran's air defense capabilities to almost nothing. At least, that's what President Trump has always claimed. So how was Iran still able to shoot down an F-15 fighter jet? What kind of fighter jet is this F-15 Eagle exactly? And how did Iran manage to shoot it down? This is the topic we're going to discuss today. As for the answer I want to give you, or rather, my analysis, it's likely to be a fairly accurate take on this matter. Also, yesterday, there was some big news. Trump released the federal budget for 2027. We all know that the 2026 federal budget hasn't even passed in the Department of Homeland Security yet, and now the 2027 budget has already been put forward. So Trump is really forward-thinking in the way he does things. But that's not even the main news today. What's the main news? Trump wants to increase the military budget by another $500 billion. What a joke. We need to know that when Trump first took office in 2016, the U.S. military budget was less than $500 billion. Trump wants to increase it to $1.5 trillion by 2027. Right now, it has already jumped to $1 trillion, and now he wants to raise it to $1.5 trillion. That's tripling it. Where is there so much money to increase the military budget? So first, why does he want to increase the military budget by so much? And second, where does the U.S. have the money to do it? This is the topic we're analyzing for everyone. Third, the March employment report has already been released and U.S. employment has surged, exceeding expectations by more than 200%. So what is really going on with the U.S. economy? These are the topics Fang Wei is bringing to you today. All right, even though it's Saturday, thank you all for tuning in to Fang Wei's program at this special time. Since it's Saturday morning, I can take a bit of a break. Actually, I still got up at 4:30 this morning, but anyway, I'm really glad that everyone is still tuning into my show over the weekend. Today's news is actually quite interesting. And in fact, the news is interesting every day. Almost every day's news is interesting, mainly because of President Trump. So let me say it again. Welcome to Fang Wei's show, which used to be called Good Morning America, but now it's already Good Afternoon America. To all the viewers on YouTube, hello, and greetings to the listeners of Sound of Hope and Silicon Valley FM 96.1. All right, let's start with the first news item. Trump just posted a tweet, which is essentially issuing Iran another ultimatum. Some viewers have said that Trump has given quite a few ultimatums already, and that's actually true. But this time, it's still an ultimatum. Just listen to what I have to say, and you'll understand. Trump said, "Do you remember I gave Iran 10 days until April 6th? By April 6th, either you reach an agreement or you open up the Strait of Hormuz. Now, there isn't much time left. In another 48 hours, the fires of hell will rain down." Glory does not belong to God, okay? So what kind of agreement does Trump want? Trump's agreement requires Iran to give up its nuclear weapons capability, stop its uranium enrichment activities, and restrict its missile production program, as well as curb the activities of its terrorist proxies in the Middle East. At the same time, Iran would open the strait in exchange for the US not attacking Iran's basic economic infrastructure, and possibly even a relaxation of sanctions. However, so far, Iran has not made any response, and their only reply has been to refuse. So, as you just heard, Trump said, in 48 hours, the fires of hell will rain down. Glory to God. What does that mean? How do you interpret what was said? Let me share my thoughts. Doesn't this whole declaration sound like a claim to carry out divine justice? That God wants to punish you through my hands? That's basically what it means, right? So regarding Trump's ultimatum, how much do you agree with it? Everyone can write a sentence to express your opinion. Do you agree with Trump's declaration of acting as an agent of divine justice? Or do you disagree? You're welcome to leave your comments. All right, now let's talk about the second piece of news, which is the main news today. Yesterday, a US F-15E, what does the E stand for? E means Eagle, as in the F-15 Eagle fighter jet, was hit by an Iranian missile. I was originally going to talk about a possibility, but now it's clearly already happened. However, the pilot has been rescued and brought back, but the aircraft's so-called weapons pod is still missing. What is a weapons pod? I'll explain that to everyone in a moment. So, at this very moment in time, the critical question we are facing is whether the weapons pod managed to successfully eject from the aircraft and remains hidden away in an unknown location and hasn't been found yet, or if it simply failed to eject as originally intended. It's still unclear whether it crashed together with the plane, but after the plane was shot down yesterday, both sides deployed a large number of troops to recover personnel. Iran sent a significant number of ground forces, while the US dispatched its Mike Hotel 64 helicopters. Along with escort fighter jets, both sides were engaged, one in search and capture, the other in search and rescue. During this process, there was intense confrontation between the two sides, coming into close contact. 2 helicopters involved in the combat search and rescue mission, responsible for locating the missing pilot, were part of the rescue operation. They came under fire from the Iranian side and were damaged. However, although some of the crew members were injured, no one was killed. Both helicopters ultimately landed safely and returned without further incident. At present, the rescue operation has managed to save one person. They rescued the pilot, but the weapons officer has not yet been rescued. Then, as direct clashes between US and Iranian forces have intensified, the Israeli military has now suspended its attacks on Iran to cooperate with the US military's search and rescue operation for the missing F-15. The officer in charge of the weapon system on the Eagle fighter jet, okay? The crash site is in the west of Iran in a place called Khuzestan province. This is a settlement area for Arab tribes who oppose the central Iranian government. You know, Arabs are a minority in Iran, which is made up mainly of Persians. It's basically an area where Arabs are concentrated. Although this could be advantageous for the stranded pilots, it also means that the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, since they are stationed here to suppress the Arabs, has a large military presence in this area. So the Revolutionary Guard was able to mobilize very quickly and in large numbers. Meanwhile, the second American military fighter jet involved in the mission, which was actually an A-10 Thunderbolt II, more commonly known as the Warthog attack aircraft, the large one equipped with a massive, high-powered rotary aerial cannon, also crashed near the Strait of Hormuz, after coming under intense and heavy enemy ground fire. However, the pilot has already been successfully rescued. Of course, this is also a significant change because up until today, not a single American aircraft had been hit by Iran during the war, except for 3 that were hit by Kuwait itself, by its own air defense system. Such an incident had not occurred with Iran until yesterday. Now, there have been problems with 2 such aircraft. Okay, so here I want to talk about something regarding American search and rescue. We know that during the search and rescue operations, there have already been American casualties, not deaths, but injuries. The US military is quite different from almost every other military in the world in this regard. It has a very important creed called "Leave nobody behind." Sometimes, even if it's just one person, well, in this case, it's two people who crashed. The US military will mobilize a large force to rescue these 2 individuals. Could this lead to even greater casualties? Of course, that's possible, right? But will the US military still go ahead with the rescue? They will definitely attempt to rescue. This is a defining characteristic of the US military. The US military has this kind of ethos, which in English is called a creed, such as "leave nobody behind" or "leave no comrade behind." This is explicitly stated in the regulations of the Army and Air Force, but actually in the Marine Corps and the Navy, it's also the case. This is the creed of the entire military. In other words, if anyone is wounded in war, we are absolutely committed to rescuing them. Even if someone dies, we will do everything possible to recover the body. This is even the source of regret for the US military, decades after the Korean War. They are determined to bring them back. This is the creed of the US military. So you might ask, is this rational or not? In order to save 2 people, you risk the lives of 20 more or even 200. Is this approach rational or not? Logically speaking, it really isn't rational, but why is it the creed of the US military? Because it has always been this way. What it brings is that when soldiers go into battle, they know the entire military is there to protect them. So this brings 2 things. First, the high morale of the US military, and second, the strong mutual trust within the army. There is trust between everyone. When we go out, we have each other's backs. I can entrust my back to my comrade or to my superior officer. I can entrust myself to my army, to my president. In the US military, if you are unfortunately captured and become a prisoner of war, in many countries, being forced to surrender is considered a humiliation. But in the US, the experience of being a prisoner of war is seen as a heroic one. Absolutely not a disgrace. So when POWs return, it's generally regarded as surviving a great ordeal and coming back. It carries that kind of meaning. Let me give you a few examples here. One is from 1967, a man named John McCain. During the Vietnam War, he was an Air Force pilot who was shot down by North Vietnam and then captured by the North Vietnamese. He was held captive for 5.5 years before being released. As we all know, he later became the Republican presidential candidate in 2008. He was also a senator from Arizona and then the Republican presidential candidate. His harrowing experience as a prisoner of war only served to enhance his formidable aura. It certainly did not bring him any sense of shame. In a similar turn of events, another individual named James Stockdale, back in 1965, which was 2 years earlier, was also taken as a prisoner during the Vietnam War. He was imprisoned for 7 years, and as you can see, he suffered severe torture during his captivity. Later, after he was released after the prisoner exchange, he was awarded the Medal of Honor, the Honor Medal, a matter of honor. He later rose to the rank of Vice Admiral in the Navy, and in 1992, he also ran as a candidate for President of the United States. Another person, also in the same year, 1965, was named Jeremy Denton. Jeremy Denton was an American pilot who was shot down during the Vietnam War in 1965 and was held captive for 8 years. He later became a US Senator from Alabama. Okay, later he also became a senior official in the Department of Defense under President Reagan. As you can see here, on the right is the prisoner of war and on the left is President Reagan. Another more recent example is Jessica Lynch. Jessica Lynch was involved in the Iraq War in 2003. She was captured and after being held by the Iraqi army for several days, was rescued by US Special Forces. She later became an American hero, giving speeches everywhere as an American hero, and there was even a movie made specifically about her. So this is the American spirit. The US believes in not leaving anybody behind, leave no comrade behind. And if, unfortunately, you are captured, it's not a big deal. If you can endure it, you become an American hero because you were imprisoned for your country, detained by the other side for your country. Even if you are tortured or subjected to cruel treatment, the United States will still bring you back and compensate you. That's what it means. All right, now, what do you all think about this American principle, this creed? They are willing to risk more lives just to rescue one or two Americans. How do you view this belief held by the US military? Please leave your thoughts in the comments, okay? I'm really curious to know what everyone thinks, because this is very different from China and very different from many other countries as well. All right, next let's talk about how Iran was able to shoot down an American F-15 fighter jet. First, what exactly is the F-15 fighter jet and what is the F-105E? As you all know, the US Air Force's top fighter jet is called the F-15, right? So what kind of fighter is it? It's an air combat fighter specialized in aerial dogfights, that is, air-to-air combat. It's a single-seat aircraft. Now, the F-15E is a two-seat heavy strike fighter developed from the F-15, which entered service in the 1980s, specifically in 1988. What is a strike fighter? In English, it's called a strike fighter. It performs two main tasks. One is still air combat, dealing with enemy aircraft, and the second is precision ground attack. These are the core and important missions of the F-15 Eagle fighter, namely air-to-ground strikes. That's why it has two seats. One seat is for the pilot, just like in the regular F-15, and the other in the back is for the weapons officer, who is specifically responsible for operating precision bombs, bomb release, and missiles. So it has the capability to carry out precise strikes deep behind enemy lines, targeting the enemy's rear positions. What are its drawbacks? The main drawback of this aircraft is that it cannot evade radar detection. It is visible to radar. However, it does have two features to counter this. One is that it is equipped with an electronic warfare system which supports it as it flies forward by continuously disrupting enemy radar. It emits radar jamming signals as it goes. This causes the enemy's radar to have a hard time locking onto it due to the interference. That's one point. The second point is that it has a very strong capability for low-altitude penetration. What does that mean? It means flying close to the ground, flying right above the surface. As everyone knows, radar has a limitation called the radar horizon, right? The Earth is round, it's curved. If you're below the radar horizon or behind a mountain, the radar can't detect you. So if you fly close to the ground, by the time the radar picks you up, you've already passed by and are gone. The radar still can't catch up because you've already hidden behind the terrain or behind a mountain again. So this is its advantage. So basically, the F-15 Eagle's strength lies in its ability to strike ground targets. And if it really encounters enemy aircraft, it can pull up and engage in a dogfight in the air. This kind of close combat is called a dogfight in English. It's called a dogfight, which literally means dogs fighting each other, biting and wrestling, basically chasing and twisting around each other. Doesn't this story sound a lot like the movie Top Gun starring Tom Cruise, the kind of aerial combat shown in Top Gun? Doesn't it sound just like that? The story in the movie is all about flying close to the ground, getting to the target area to drop bombs, then escaping. And when enemy planes catch up, they can still engage in dogfights with them, right? No, that's not it. Well, yes and no. Even so, how should I put it? This movie, Top Gun. How many of you have seen Top Gun? Is there anyone who hasn't seen it? If you've seen Top Gun, could you leave a comment? Let's see what the percentage is. Let's do a little poll, shall we? Let's leave a message on behalf of Hollywood, even though Hollywood is really declining these days. But I'm still very curious to know how many of our viewers have seen Top Gun, which is called Top Gun in English. In the first Top Gun movie, Tom Cruise flew an F-14 fighter jet. That was even earlier. In the second movie, he flew an F-18, which is the Navy's Super Hornet fighter jet. Both of these planes came before the F-15 Eagle. So what are the differences between the F-15 Eagle and the F-14 and F-18? It has a very, very important difference. It is equipped with something called terrain following data. What does that mean? It can fly close to the ground without needing an ace pilot like Tom Cruise. The radar can automatically keep the plane flying close to the terrain, making it even harder to hit. So, to put it simply, the F-15E is controlled by radar to fly close to the ground. You'd only spot it when it's already right upon you, so even though it's not stealthy, it's still very, very hard to detect. So in this situation, how could Iran possibly catch it? Weren't all of Iran's radars destroyed by the US military, right? And as soon as a radar is turned on, the US military would immediately detect it and come in to destroy your radar. So how did Iran manage to catch this F-15E? All right, let's talk about one possibility next. This possibility is gradually becoming a consensus. The idea is that Iran set up an ambush, and in this ambush area, the radar was turned off. With the radar off, the US military couldn't detect that there was a radar there, nor could they identify the ambush zone. Then, once the plane entered the kill zone of the ambush, the radar was suddenly switched on. You know, when the radar is suddenly turned on. Suddenly catching the target and launching a missile. That's what it means. Okay, so what does this imply? It means there's a condition here. The US military always flies along a fixed route, and Iran already knows this. So they set up an ambush along this route that the planes must pass through. They placed radar and missiles here, but usually everything is turned off. So the US military can't detect them. Then, as you keep following your usual pattern and fly in again, they instantly turn everything on, and within a matter of seconds, they lock on and launch a missile to track you, because, as everyone knows, the F-15E doesn't have stealth capabilities. Once the radar locks on, it could hit you and shoot you down. That's how they shoot you down, just like waiting by the tree for the rabbit. You were too careless, always flying the same route, so I intercept you right on your fixed path. Has this ever happened before? Yes, it happened once on March 27, 1999. This was the only time. At that time, the US military was bombing the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia, specifically Serbia in the Yugoslav Federation. This place is near Belgrade. Actually, later on, the United States made a movie about it. Hollywood made a film called Behind Enemy Lines. Has anyone seen this Behind Enemy Lines? That's the movie. So, what happened that day? On that night, the US military bombed Serbia, and they deployed the F-117 fighter jets. What is the F-117? It's the US military's stealth fighter. So, you might ask, how is it related to the F-22 or F-35? The F-117 is a fourth-generation aircraft. It's from an older generation. It's the first one. This was the very first stealth fighter to come out. But the F-22 and F-35 are fifth-generation fighters, so the F-117 is relatively old. What does being old mean for stealth? It can be stealthy, but not as well as the newer ones. In order to achieve stealth, they had to change the shape of the aircraft, so this plane flies relatively slowly and isn't very agile. But no matter what, it still had some stealth capabilities. Because it was stealthy, Yugoslavia and Serbia couldn't catch it. But in the end, they made a mistake. The US military made a mistake. Their flight path was basically fixed, repeatedly flying over the same area. The US military was overconfident, thinking there was no way anyone could shoot them down, so they didn't care. Plus, the flight altitude was medium. It wasn't flying at low altitude. Of course, back then, if the F-117 wanted to fly at extremely low altitudes, it would need a Top Gun level pilot like Tom Cruise to pull it off, so it was quite tough. At that time, there was no terrain-following radar, so they flew at higher altitudes. They flew high and kept taking the same route over and over again. That's what happened. As a result, the Serbians observed and noticed that the American flight paths always repeated at the same altitude and along the same routes, so they set up an ambush, just waiting for them to show up. They hid a radar vehicle in the woods. Then they used their radar, which is called a low-frequency radar. As you know, in general electronic warfare, the electronic warfare systems on American aircraft usually detect high-frequency radar. The jamming signals they emit are also high-frequency, right? So they can jam high-frequency radar. So what's the difference between low frequency and high frequency? Low frequency, the detection isn't very clear. It can only vaguely pick up the target of the aircraft. High frequency, on the other hand, is much more precise. But in order to achieve the objective, they sacrifice clarity. It's enough as long as they can detect it. So the Serbians were very clever. They were really smart at the time. They used low-frequency radar and hid it in the woods, and the missile vehicles stayed right next to the radar, usually turned off. As a result, when the F-117 approached, they actually spotted it with their eyes. They visually spotted the F-117 coming in and then suddenly switched on the radar. The radar instantly locked on and then they launched the missile. That's how they fired it. The whole process took only a few dozen seconds. They launched 2 Soviet-made S-125 surface-to-air missiles. This is an old missile, built in the 1960s. They fired 2 missiles, 1 missed and 1 hit. That's how they shot down that American F-117 stealth aircraft. This is the only instance in the world where a stealth aircraft has been shot down, and it happened on March 27, 1999. Okay, so the pilot was named Del Zelko. He managed to eject successfully before the plane crashed. He hid in the fields or maybe in a ditch and maintained radio silence. When the Serbians came in to capture him, they couldn't find him. He basically became invisible. He didn't turn on his radio, so no one could detect his location. Later, after he found a safe and suitable spot, he used an encrypted radio to contact the US military. He reported his position from there. In the end, he hid behind enemy lines for 6 hours. Later, US Special Forces were deployed, search and rescue teams transported by MH-53 helicopters, along with air cover. They went in and rescued him. So in the end, the rescue was a complete success. He was brought back without a scratch. This is almost a textbook-level success story in the history of American air combat. Of course, during those 6 hours in the wild, he was able to survive, evade capture, and eventually make contact with headquarters. This is what Americans refer to as the classic SERE training: survival, evasion, resistance, and escape. All of this is vividly depicted in the movie Behind Enemy Lines. But anyway, what we're seeing now is this. If this so-called weapons officer, after successfully ejecting, can't be found, what does that mean? Actually, if he can't be found, that's good news. This is just like what happened in the US. Yesterday, Fox interviewed a retired US Air Force Brigadier General. He himself served as an F-15 Eagle fighter pilot named Cathy. He said that although the environment is extremely dangerous, the current silence on the ground is actually a good sign. This means that the aircraft has already been shot down for some time, right? So everyone is very worried, but I think the advantages outweigh the disadvantages. Why? Because they are applying the training they have received. The calm on the ground indicates that the weapons officer has not been captured by the enemy. Otherwise, the enemy would definitely make a huge fuss and loudly publicize it, wouldn't they? So if he hasn't been captured, then the US military is currently assessing the terrain and the enemy's deployment to find the most appropriate time and method to carry out the rescue. The crew members from the crashed aircraft. So first, it means they haven't been captured, and second, it's very likely they're hiding somewhere, waiting for the right moment, because this is an important concept in SERE training. So what is the key principle taught in SERE training? First, let's talk about what SERE is. SERE stands for survival evasion, which means evading capture or search efforts. Then R stands for resistance, which means to resist. And the E is escape, meaning to escape. So, after a pilot is shot down and ejects, they have to find water on their own, find food on their own, survive in the wild by themselves, and be able to administer first aid to themselves. No matter if it's in extremely cold, high altitude, or extremely hot regions, they have to be able to survive and live in the wild for several days. That's the situation. And in case they're captured, they need to know how to face interrogation, and after interrogation, how to escape from captivity. There's a complete set of training for all of this. Countries around the world, including the Chinese Communist Party and Russia, also have similar types of training, but theirs are divided into separate training modules, whereas the United States has a systematic program. So the important principle here is that when a pilot is downed, they shouldn't just run away blindly or try to escape as far as possible. Instead, they should wait quietly and look for opportunities to communicate. That's basically the situation, right? All right, so what we hope for, first of all, is we really hope that the pilot was able to eject successfully. There's also the possibility that he didn't manage to eject and just crashed to the ground and was killed. But if he did eject successfully, it's clear that he hasn't been captured yet. All right, back to our main topic. How did Iran manage to hit it? Most likely it happened like this. The US military got careless, always flying the same route, which allowed Iran to predict their path and set up an ambush in advance. Then they suddenly turned on their radar and launched a missile without warning. And not only was the US military careless, always flying the same route, but they also ignored the ground and didn't fly at low altitude. You know, the F-15 Eagle fighter jet actually has terrain-following radar, so you can fly close to the ground effortlessly. It's very likely that they were flying at high altitude, flying both high and along the same old routes, so they ended up flying right into the enemy's ambush zone. In fact, under these circumstances, if you enter the ambush zone and get caught, it's even possible to be shot down by anti-aircraft guns. Of course, the probability of actually being hit is very low, but regardless, if you do enter the ambush zone, you really do face this kind of danger. That would be a careless mistake. There are a lot of people online saying that Iran has developed something called a passive infrared radar. Well, it's hard to say for sure, but there is some logic to it. What does that mean? First of all, there is no such thing as a passive infrared radar. Because it's not actually a radar, it's just a type of sensing device. What does it sense? It senses heat, it detects heat sources. These instruments, infrared radar, or rather infrared devices, don't emit any signals. So, what does that mean? The F-15 fighter jet can't detect it, so it won't attack it. However, it just stays in that spot and only captures heat sources in the air. For example, the F-15E's engine produces a very hot jet exhaust, right? Plus, when the aircraft flies through the air, the friction with the air also generates heat and so on. These all become heat signals. So it might only be when it's very close that this device can detect that an aircraft is approaching. That's the situation. However, its drawback is that its detection range is much shorter than radar, and it's also very difficult to accurately measure distance. It can only tell you that something is coming, but it can't aim precisely. If you just know something is coming, what's the use, right? You need the missile to lock onto the target, so just knowing something is coming is useless. This is what's called a passive infrared device, a detector. It can't lock onto an aircraft and guide the missile to follow it. It can't direct the missile to follow the target. So the correct approach is this. Use the infrared detection tool to sense the target first, so you don't have to rely on your eyes. Once it's detected, immediately switch on the low-frequency radar to confirm the target, then pass the target information to the missile. The missile is then launched instantly, and if you're lucky, it can hit the target. So the whole situation might be like this. What does that mean? First, the US military is acting with great righteousness, and second, it's basically like waiting by a tree stump for a rabbit to come by, just waiting for a rabbit in the end. So this whole thing is really, really low probability. It's just very unlikely. It's like Iran happened to run into a transport plane just by chance, that's all it is. But no matter what, for the US military, this is definitely a lesson. They can't afford to be careless. All right, so now we all hope and pray for the American pilot. Let's pray for him. We pray for him and hope that he can be found safely. All right, that's the situation on this matter. Next, let me tell you about a major move by Trump. Trump is increasing the military budget by $500 billion. What's going on with that? Before we get into that, let me first mention that our sponsors' products are somewhat related to our program. When a plane crashes, what's the first reaction from both sides? It's to rescue people, right? Rescue the people, carry out emergency repairs and rescue operations. Isn't that so? Because if the aircraft is damaged and you don't deal with it, things will only get worse. Our bodies are the same way. When many people start having health problems, their first reaction isn't to seek help, but to tough it out and delay, thinking maybe it'll just pass. But your body keeps sending out warning signals, right? Have you noticed that? So we recommend you try out the products from our program's sponsor that we're recommending to everyone. The Red Sea Cucumber Health Gel helps you repair your body's functions. Let me share a true story with you. This is from a lady in California. We actually have a lot of these stories. Many of them are very long messages, but I won't play them all for you. They're real, because when people call our customer service, they tell us these stories. These are not made up. They're all genuine accounts. So she started experiencing rheumatoid arthritis symptoms back in 2012 or 2013. It's been 10 years now. In the past 2 years, doctors have diagnosed her as being in stage 4. The meniscus in her knee is almost indistinguishable. Because of her joint problems, she lives on the second floor, and climbing up to the second floor every day is very painful for her. She practically has to drag one leg up after the other. So, what about last August? She decided to give it a try after hearing our recommendation and started using our Red Sea Cucumber Health Gel. After taking it for about 2 months, she was surprised to find that when going upstairs, she could alternate her feet, going up one after the other. She could walk up the stairs normally, no longer dragging her feet like before. She was very grateful for our recommendation of this Red Sea Cucumber Health Gel, and even introduced it to her mother, her sister, and her brother-in-law. Now, they are all taking it together. Of course, I should mention that this is just a personal experience. Results may vary from person to person. Not everyone will have the same experience, because this product is not a medicine, it's not a drug, it's a nutritional supplement. So why is the effect so noticeable? This is related to its production process. First, the source, it comes from wild, deep-sea Red Sea cucumbers from Jeju Island, South Korea. Second, although Red Sea cucumbers are rich in nutrients, they are very troublesome to process. Normally, after being harvested, if you don't boil or steam it at high temperatures, the sea cucumber will dissolve. But once it's out of the sea, if you cook it at high temperatures, its nutrients get destroyed. It's a dilemma, isn't it? The nutrient in question here is sea cucumber saponin. Things like collagen and polysaccharides, these are all treasures. So this Red Sea Cucumber Health Gel is made using a low temperature extraction process, which allows for a complete extraction without destroying these core components. This greatly increases the absorption rate, so naturally the effects are different. Alright, if you purchase now and enter Fangwei's promo code, which is Fangwei, you can enjoy a 15% discount. For friends who subscribe to the reading plan, you can get a 20% discount starting from the second month. If you subscribe to the reading plan before April 12th, there will be additional gifts. The detailed information is in the description bar at the bottom of the screen. So before April 12th, please take advantage of this opportunity. I really recommend everyone to give it a try. If you've never tried it before, you can define it for yourself and give it a shot to see how it works for you. Last night, I saw a comment from a viewer who said he had some issues with his arm. After taking it for about a month, it seemed like there wasn't much improvement with his arm, but his skin became smoother. He thought that was pretty good, so it seems like it's not bad and still worth it. Yes, exactly. So, in short, everyone's experience is different, but we have indeed heard a lot of positive feedback. That's also why I recommend it to everyone.